If you have your Bible open to Genesis chapter 48, we're going to start here, but we're going to be looking at some of the neighboring chapters and verses as we consider the Champion from Challenges legacy living. Now, if you're like me, you enjoy taking rides around into the region and looking at some of the foliage. Some of the fall leaves have really shown off beautifully. I took that picture up on the hill behind here, was out with my dogs, and we were going over the hill, and some of the trees were really pretty, and I snapped that picture and thought, wow, this is a beautiful thing. And I know that some of you perhaps like doing that type of thing as well. And then the leaves just give off all kinds of beauty and all kinds of color and just spectacular symphony of design of God. And then they will fall off. There are some, however, who will just turn brown and they're going to hang on the tree forever. They'll be there next spring. They don't have a beautiful, graceful ending that you can see. They probably never really turn real pretty, but now they're just kind of faded, hanging there all winter long. They're just going to hang on that tree. And they're just going to hang on that tree until we come to springtime. What kind of ending do you want to your life? Do you want like that beautiful fall, or do you want like that crisp, brown, yucky leaf? What kind of tree do you want to be whenever you come to the end of your life and look back over it all? Hebrews chapter 11, we find in verse 21 that it tells us the foliage on Jacob's leaves. It says this in that Hall of Faith chapter. It says, by faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshiped as he leaned on the top of his staff. Something is very interesting in this passage right there when we think about it. He has come to the end of his life, and the two most important things come to the surface. Mentions nothing about his trophies, mentions nothing about his bank account, mentions nothing about the car in the shed. Nothing is mentioned about all the good things that he has done along the way. Nope, it talks to us there in that passage about his family. Family is very important, and especially when we come to the end of our life. We want to live a life where our family will be glad to be around us, even though it is a painful time. Where they won't be wanting to stand on the oxygen cord when we're at our last moments of life, but instead they'll be there trying to encourage us and trying to inspire us, even in that last little bit. But something else is very great and very awesome and incredible here, and that is he also talks about his God. His God was very important to him. He didn't misunderstand as he is dying. There's nothing deceptive about him when he's coming to the end of his life. There's nothing that he's fooling around with and dabbling in when he comes to the end of his life. It's only the things that matter that rise to the top when we come to the end of everything that is called our life. Now, Lee Deming, he said it this way. He says, as a pastor with Highlands Church, he said, there's a difference between dynasty and legacy. Dynasties are selfish. Dynasties are those things where we're trying to build everything up for ourselves. We're trying to build a big name for ourselves. We're trying to build up some kind of just self-recognition. Now, it is true that Jacob finds his name in that great trilogy of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That is true. But when he comes to this moment in this passage, he's looking at legacies. And Deming puts it this way: legacies are selfless. Legacies are those things that you pour into other people because you want them to do well even whenever you are gone. You're thinking about that. Max Lucado in his writing put it this way, and I thought he had a good point. He said, you have one life to live. And then he puts this phrase, once in a history opportunity. You and I have once in a history opportunity. And when you think about it that way, you have the opportunity to make the most of your life right now. Every decision is adding to the one before. Every decision is creating the person people around you know you to be. Erik Erikson, who was rated the top 12, he was number 12, psychologist in the 20th century. He had some things to say. You might recognize the term that he used, identity crisis. He coined that phrase. But he also broke life out into 8 stages, and he came to that last stage and he put it together this way for the last stage. He said the psychosocial stage number 8, which is the last one when you're moving toward the end of your life, it is called the stage of integrity or despair. Now, despair is whenever you look back over your life and you look back at decisions you made and you don't like it. You didn't really reconcile things that were needing to be done. You have come to this point in your life where you say, life should have given me more. I should have had a better life. You kind of have bitterness and you have despair. So he says we have that opportunity. But he calls it integrity. Integrity is when we look back over our life as we're looking at it and we say, well, I made a lot of good decisions. There were some bad ones, but we know how to place those bad ones. And we know how to place those good ones. And we look at our life and we say, wow, life has been pretty incredible. It's been pretty good. We have a sense of worth. We have a sense of value. And when we look back, we don't look back with a lot of dissatisfaction, but we instead look back at our life with a lot of satisfaction. He concluded this and he said this. He said, the wisdom that individuals gain helps them even in confronting death. So today we're looking at Jacob as he comes to the end of his life. Next week we'll wrap up our series and we'll consider Joseph as he looks at the end of his life. But we'll consider this idea of living out our life successfully to make our legacy that which would be honorable before God. Jacob is an old man. He is at the end of his life. He's just about ready to die. And Jacob, as he's at the end of his life, about ready to die, is lying on a bed. Now, I will tell you that unless you have a car wreck, unless you have some kind of just an accident and you just fall over, unless something like that happens, the chances are incredibly high that you will end your life in a bed, on a couch, on some sort of a table. You'll come to the last part of your life. Jacob's not that different than you and me. He's at the end of his life, and as he comes to the end of his life, he props himself up on his bed. He props himself up on his bed because he says, I've got some things that I want to say to you. I've got some things I don't want you to forget. There are some things I think would help you as you move forward in life. So he's trying to invest in them. It's a very selfless thing to do. It's not the long finger, but it is the finger that helps point the way, that causes you to say, I want to know what's going on with that. I want to look at 3 significant moments in this chapter and the surrounding chapters and verses. And as we look at them, we'll see how to create a meaningful legacy ourselves. The first thing I want to point out is in chapter 48, verse 3 through 16, Jacob remembered his blessings. He took a little trip down memory's lane as he starts talking, and he said, I remember my encounter at Bethel. It was at Bethel when I was there where God blessed me. It was at Bethel where God increased me. It was at Bethel where God said he's going to give me this land forever. It is at Bethel that I had an encounter there and remember what happened whenever I encountered with God. He also does something else in verse 7 that I thought was interesting. He starts talking about his wife. Now, I grew up in the Midwest, and we talk about things and use this phrase. It is an idiom you use here as well. But it is this idiom, it's talking about rabbit trails. Rabbit trails is when you're going down this path, you're just doing really good, and all of a sudden you take a detour and you go winding back through the brush over here somewhere, and then you bounce back onto the path over here. He takes this rabbit trail of drifting in verse 7, and he starts talking about his wife, Rachel. She'd been dead for 20 years, but he talks about her in fondness. He talks about her in kindness. Isn't it neat when we can say kind words about the person that maybe was significant in our life after they die, to say some genuine, beautiful things about them? He talked about her. But he also, in verse 16 of our passage here, he remembered God. He's remembering God. He remembers when he wrestled with the angel. We've talked about it, so I won't rehash it a lot. Only to say to you, he had been a very deceptive person, but now he comes to that moment where as he wrestles, his name gets changed from Jacob, the deceiver, to Israel. Israel means the Prince of God. And when he gets changed to that, it reminds us that God allows you and I to make U-turns in our life. Perhaps your life has been a bit like his or something similar, and you say, well, wow, I've given myself to things I really wish I wouldn't have. I've done things I really wish I wouldn't. You lay awake at night kind of thinking through those, or you turn on the white noise so loud that you won't be able to think of anything else. But that rushing sound of the white noise as it roars in your ear to help lull you to sleep so you won't have to think about things in your life that you've had happen to you. He remembered God, and he remembered God in a fond way. And he also looks at Joseph, and he remembers him. In verse 11, he's looking at Joseph, and he remembers the last time he saw Joseph. He said to Joseph, I want you to go check on your brothers. Now, at first service, I had them going out to war. Well, his brothers weren't out at war. They were out tending the sheep. I just swung and missed and got it wrong. Got David and Joseph mixed up. Have you ever done that? I did. Man, so let's have him doing the right thing this time. He's going out to see the sheep. Everybody say sheep. You sound like you were bleeding sheep. And so he says, I want you to go out. I want you to check on your brothers. I want you to come back and give to me a report on how things are going. Joseph was younger than his brother, and he was feeling really good. And he's saying, yeah, I'll be glad to go. I'll go. And so his dad's standing there. He said, now, you take care of that coat. You can hear him say it, something like that. Take care of that coat. It's all colorful. I got it special for you. And you come back as soon as you can. You hear, yeah, I'll come back, Dad. And you can see him turn back and smile. And then he keeps walking. And the young guy, he's walking. And finally, the distance swallows him up. And he's out of sight. And he's gone. Jacob said, well, I better get on with whatever else I had to do. So he's getting ready to do whatever else, thinking he's going to see his son in a couple of days. But a couple of days turns into he isn't coming back. And a bloody coat. He has the bloody coat. The other brothers have brought it back. He thinks he is dead. He's thinking, wow. But now his sons have come to him and said, no. We found out Joseph isn't dead. He's really alive. He really is alive. And the crazy thing is, he wants us to take you to him. He's over in Egypt. We'd have to take you over there. Alistair Begg summed it up this way. He said, Jacob's driveway was filled with carts and donkeys loaded with goods that Joseph had sent over to him and Pharaoh had sent over to him. They're goods from Egypt. Jacob knew they didn't belong to him, verse 27. Furthermore, those carts weren't Canaanite carts. Nope, they weren't Canaanite carts. The steering was on the wrong side, if you will. Their markings and features told Jacob that these are foreign carts. Jacob surveyed the scene, and suddenly it sank into him. His sons were now telling him the truth. I'm convinced, he cried out. My son Joseph is still alive. I will go, and I'll see him with my eyes before I die. I'm going to go do that. Man, reunions can be fun. They can be incredible when you've been separated for a while. Can you imagine it? Look at this.
High school, where his son Caleb is exercising, and he sneaks in.
Caleb Lee, are you working hard?
A moment, 9 months in the making, timed perfectly.
His friends are here, girls are here. Let me cry. You didn't let it.
Oh, that's all right there.
He cried a little bit, but that's okay. That was his natural reaction. That was there. And that's really the reaction I thought he would have.
Please make welcome back home, First Lieutenant.
have a special guest delivering tonight's game puck. Please direct your attention to the Coyotes.
Dad Roney, Dad Urban, Sergeant, surprising his mom and dad.
Is unbelievable. Take a look at that. That is a proud father right there.
Hey, let's hear it for our soldiers. Jacob's an old man. They're probably worried about him having a heart attack. And by the way, I'm not crying. Who's crying? Everybody in the room's wiping their eyes. You can go ahead and do it. You don't have to be tough. It's okay. Wow, I love that. Jacob. Joseph, really? He's alive? Yep, you're going to get to see him. He gets over there and he sees him. I can't even imagine. If heaven has video, I hope to see it. I hope they had a private time when they could get together because it would have been so emotionally charged. They get to see each other and they get to celebrate. Man alive, he gets to see what he looks like now 20 years later. The milk cartons that he had sent out with all the pictures on them and all the TV ads saying, my son's missing, if you see him, I'd like to see him, and all that kind of, no more. And you think about it, and sometimes these reunion things you hear about, they said, yeah, we got together and we had a meal and then we went our way. We don't know if we'll meet again. Let me tell you what happened. Pharaoh really, moved Jacob over to Egypt. And for 15 years, he got to live over there in the land with his father. And I noticed something else. Jacob's blessings remembered him. Chapter 49, verse 22 through 26, and then in chapter 50, starting in verse 15. His blessings would remember him. We think about last words. John Wesley, the Wesleyans, the Methodists, people like that. We think about a lot of the last words. And the last words of Wesley, the best of all is, God is with us. Or what about Winston Churchill? He said, I'm bored with it all. I'm bored with it all. Or what about Elwood Edwards? You know his voice. AOL, you've got mail. That's his voice. He died this week. Goodbye. That's what he said, and that's what you hear or have heard so many times. Jacob shares last words with his sons. Verse 22 through 26, he gives different instructions and blessings. And then he gives a call. Listen to this. He gives a call for peace. He gives a call for peace. The brothers feared that when their dad died, now that they're all living over in Egypt, that when their dad died, that Jacob's death would bring about the opening of Joseph's revenge against them. Retribution against them. It was going to be something that they dreaded. It was something they feared. He had power to do anything to them. He could put them out. And Jacob said, I don't want any of that kind of stuff. I'm calling for peace. And in chapter 50, verses 16 and 17, we see that Joseph, he wept because his dad would even have to give those instructions. Jacob was in the room with someone who had outgrown him. His own son, Joseph, had outgrown him in this moment. He was in the room with somebody who was bigger than all of the other boys put together. It was Joseph. He was not going to stoop to do some sort of retaliation against his brothers. He had a job too big to do, too important to do. He said, I am saving the lives of many, many people in the land. I'm not going to stoop to give myself over to that predatory kind of person. I don't want to make my life that type of thing. What about you? What about you? At this church a number of years ago, there was a man who told me what he thought of me, and he took his time telling me. He told me that he didn't think much of me, and he thought I was no good at preaching, and he felt like it was a bad thing that I had ever even come here. And I listened to him tell me what he thought, and I told him, finally, this conversation is over, and you're welcome to exit over there. And he left, and he never came back to this church. He was gone. Years passed, And I heard he was sick, very sick. And then I knew what was coming. He died. Now, I don't have all power at this church, but I do have quite a bit of influence as the gatekeeper of the pastoral side of the ministry of this church. And so they came to me, my team did, and said, so-and-so has passed away, and they would like to have the funeral at this church. What do you say? Some of you have power and influence, and you make decisions. You're managers, you're owners of businesses. You can get even and settle any score any day. You can do whatever you feel needs to happen in that moment, right? You have that power. A guy came up to me and talked to me about it in second service. Talked about how he grew from being that kind of person to being a more peaceable. And so they said to me, what is your pleasure on this? I said, they can have the funeral here for this person. Give them the best that we have. And that's what happened. We gave the best that we have. I will say to you that you're going to learn in your story, forgiveness is much better than retaliation. I go to bed at night not worried about that. Not worried about an attitude that I put on. Not allowing myself to shrink to the level that man was, but to allow myself to live at a higher level. And Joseph was living at a higher level. He was not going to squish his enemies. In Psalm 145, verse 4, it's put this way. One generation tells the next about God. Let me tell you something. We do that with our words. We do that with our attitudes. We do that with our actions. For sometimes it is our attitudes and our actions that speak much louder than do our words. Can I get a witness in the house? Sometimes it is those things that are most learned by our others that are around us, and especially our family, and they see how we roll. And they began, and Jacob went on, and he went on giving blessings to his family, and he gave a rich blessing to his son Joseph that he would give. So I want to just ask you a couple questions while we pause a second in this message. And the question I want to say to you is, what if God places you ahead of your family members? What if God puts you ahead in your company? Ahead of where you thought you would be, ahead of where anybody else thought you would be, definitely your coworker. And what if God places a special touch in your life and He makes your name great? He makes your name great in your family, great in your neighborhood, great in your company, great among your peers. He makes your name great among the state. He makes your name great among the nation, maybe the world. What if God chooses to do this? What if it is His will? Joseph could look at all of his situations, being sold by his brothers, mistreated by his brothers, sold then from slavery over to Potiphar's house, and then lied about and put into prison and all that went with that, and forgotten there a couple of years. And now he's in this foreign land, but he's in charge of feeding everybody. What if Joseph looked at his life and says, I don't like what's going on. I can't handle what's going on with my life right here. No. What he did was he lifted up his head and he said, my help comes from the Lord. He lifted up his head and he said, I'm going to do the best I can. I can't change this situation. I can't do a lot about what's here, but I am going to choose my attitude and I'm going to choose my response. I will follow after the Lord. And he did that. What if God makes you the head and not the tail of your business, of your family? And then I noticed something else about Jacob. Jacob was honored by others. In chapter 49, verse 29 through 33 is where I see this. Jacob was respected in Egypt. I think Pharaoh made sure that happened because once he learned that Joseph had a father and a family, and once he understood that Joseph cared deeply about him, he sent the very best over to get them. And Jacob became a respected man in Egypt, a respected man. But now he's on his deathbed. And back in our parent passage, when we look at that in chapter 48, his abilities have eroded. He is confined now to his bed. In verse 8, his memory is kind of eroding. His thoughts are kind of wandering down those rabbit trails, like when he talked about his wife who'd been dead 20 years. His sight is failing in verse 10 of your passage. He's an elderly man, but some things remain. In verse 2, he has strength of determination. I'm going to get up. I'm going to talk. He has the support of his family. They were around him to listen. He has tender love still in his heart. You can hear it when he talks about his wife, verse 7, verse 11. As an elderly man, he gives his last words to his family. And you know what it says when you go over into chapter 49? All these words are shared there, but it comes down to verse 33. And it said, Jacob put his feet back on the bed, and he died. I like how the New King James puts this when it says it this way. He was gathered to his people. Jacob was honored with his funeral. Pharaoh said, we're going to give him the best. He is Joseph's father, and we love Joseph. He is Joseph's father. We're going to honor him, and we're going to give the best. He pulled out the best chariots. They created the biggest procession they had seen that went from Egypt to Hebron in Canaan. It was the largest one that was recorded, and they used the chariots that are only reserved for the high officials and dignitaries in the place. They embalmed his body in chapter 50, verse 2, and he was buried in the land of the patriarchs. It was an incredible thing. Jacob left an incredible legacy. He started out bad. Give me your birthright. Deceptive. Worried about his brother. Retribution. Just kind of a worrier. Having some of that, the Lord changed his name, and now he comes to this last point, and he dies. Very much so a contrast to next Sunday's message. Very much a contrast. Officer Paul Lee was a police officer, and he spent years catching criminals and witnessing evils of all kinds. He'd become callous. He said, I felt nothing. I hated everybody. I didn't feel like anyone told the truth. His marriage ended. He began drinking. He was drinking heavily. He was in constant cynicism, feeling bad about everything. Then his mother died. It was on the day of her funeral. He's in the shower, lathering up. Hot water is running around. He's doing all of his stuff. And while in that shower, he started thinking about life. This would be a moment that would break him. This would be a moment that would show him something better. This would be a moment that would show hope and possibility, difference and change. He said, I said 3 things that the criminals often say to me. I give up. I surrender. I throw in the towel. He said in an instant, Jesus became Lord of his life. Soon he joined the Fellowship of Christian Police Officers, FCPO, and he began sharing hope and life to those who were trapped and caught in the hate and the cynicism. And he said all of the stuff that's going on with habits like drinking, etc., that were just killing them. He said that feeling of loneliness and that feeling that nobody cares, he said, I started ministering toward that. He said, you realize that God has put you here for his purposes, to carry out his mission, and whatever that might be. Oh, you've gone through some stuff. I've walked through it with you, some of you. You've been there, done that. You got the T-shirt for that. But so many of you are great shining examples of people that have come through whatever it is that you've gone through, and you are here as a testimony of God's grace. I land this message with 3 questions I think you need to think about beyond this moment. What are the God moments that serve as landmarks in your life? What are those God moments? They serve as landmarks in your life. Second question, what final words do you hope to share with your family and loved ones? And the last question, What do you hope your funeral says about you? His funeral said he was well respected. His funeral says he ended well. His funeral said you'll remember his legacy. Father, I don't know how you'll use this message, but I know that you put it in here for us to see. And I thank you for including not only the faithful moments of Jacob's life, but including those times in his life where he didn't shine very bright at all, where he just swung and missed, he bombed out. Thank you for showing the seasons of his life where he turned and where he met up with you and where he ended very well compared to how he had been going. I don't know how you're working in each person's life across this auditorium today or maybe online by watching. I don't know. But you do. So I pray nothing would hinder that which is happening, that we would receive with all the receptors of our heart and mind and soul and strength. And that we would say yes to your will and yes to your way. And when we don't understand, may we keep our little hand in your great big faithful hand to walk with you in the way you want us to go, Lord. And we might come away with a story that matters most as we see you face to face in Jesus' name.